delectable in your sight, O God, our rock and our redeemer. I won't bury the lead. Bluntly, I think Thomas, who later became Doubting Thomas after the encounter in today's gospel reading, got an awful rap. He demanded proof of Jesus' resurrection, and I don't blame him. If we take the text literally, that is. And here's the thing: corpses don't normally rise from the dead, so I can certainly understand why he'd be more than a bit skeptical. Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. What these immortal words seem to suggest is that believing without seeing or evidence is to be blessed, that literally blind faith is a kind of virtue. But importantly, Thomas does acknowledge Jesus' divinity, so all is not lost, to be sure. And eventually he's canonized as a saint. And I think this still remains a bit of a troubling passage because it fails to give the proper due to the important role that doubt plays in our faith journeys and spiritual practices. And so, as I reflect upon the theme of this sermon series, this is me, this is us, and my spiritual practices, I want to affirm the doubting Thomases at Hope Central and beyond as I stand with you, because I am you. For many of us wounded by religion, it makes sense to be skeptical, for we know all too well where unquestioning belief can take humans, as evidenced by 9/11 or Jonestown, or an increasingly white Christian nationalist country with its impulses to enshrine its belief systems into every aspect of our lives. And disturbingly, depending on the outcome of the upcoming election, we could find ourselves ever closer to a nation that rivals any theocratic society, full of virulent, spirited meanness, bent on imposing a worldview in a type of modern day crusades. But if that weren't enough, I'm skeptical because I know that Popes Nicholas V and Alexander VI issued what were known as papal bulls or decrees in 1455 and 1493, respectively, giving explorers the justification for pillage and plunder and genocide of native peoples, as well as serving as the rationale for what we know as the transatlantic slave trade. I have my doubts because Christianity itself sanctioned enslavement in several passages in the New Testament. In Ephesians, in Colossians, in Timothy, in Titus, and most notably in the book of Philemon, a book that the late great theologian Howard Thurman's grandmother forbade him to read to her when she was emancipated, along with most of Paul's letters to the early church. He explained it this way in his seminal text, Jesus and the Disinherited. During the days of slavery, Thurman's grandmother told him that the master's minister would occasionally hold services for slaves. Always the white minister used as his text something from Paul. At least 3 or 4 times a year, he used as a text, "Slaves, be obedient to your masters as unto Christ." Then he would go on to show how it was God's will that we were slaves, and how if we were good and happy slaves, God would bless us. But here's the most chilling part that Thurman recounts: that it was commonplace for church services to be interrupted so that parishioners could participate in lynchings and then return to worship. Considering that the central event of the Hebrew Bible soars with the words, "Let my people go," I find the bridge between those words and those of Ephesians, Philemon, Titus, Colossians, and Timothy, frankly, a bridge too far. Now, yet, in an attempt to bridge that chasm, the move that many progressives make is to prune these disturbing passages or contextualize them in a way to acknowledge rightly that they're problematic at best and abominable at worst. I understand this impulse and have employed these tactics at other times on my journey, but I've never found them satisfying ultimately because I realized that my beef was not with the text, but rather with God. And being raised in a fairly conservative Black Baptist tradition, the notion that one could question or be mad at God was, well, blasphemous. And I suspect the reason was that we hadn't decolonized God, and that God was really a divine version of a white slave master. Eventually, though, I came to understand my questioning as a gift, and that I was rarely satisfied with what I was witnessing in the world. As a young child, I remember being on my grandparents' farm and asking them, why did the hen need a rooster in order to produce chicks? They would never tell me why. As a teenager in US history, I asked why the US government, specifically NASA, welcomed engineer Werner von Braun when it was clear that he had worked for the Nazis in World War II. Several years ago, I took one of these sort of what color is your parachute tests. But in this case, it was what color is your religious tradition, or which faith tradition should you belong to temperamentally? And the answer that came back to me was that Judaism was that tradition. And that made me laugh. Actually, I spent half of my public schooling in predominantly Jewish neighborhoods. And what I always loved about the tradition was that it welcomed and even celebrated questioning. I also learned that there were some folks who considered themselves Jewish culturally, but didn't really believe the theology. 23 years ago, when I worked as a student mentor in an interfaith program in Washington, D.C., I met Justin, a teenage guy who exemplified someone who had identified as culturally as Jewish, but also considered himself an atheist. However, what surprised me most was that every morning Justin davened or prayed. He did this day in and day out. And as you could imagine, it's a bit confusing, but there was a part of me that also found a great beauty in his practice. Years later, I was reminded of Frank Schaeffer's statement that people are often better than the theologies that they espoused. His book, Why I'm an Atheist Who Believes in God, is a kind of love letter to just that view, and I highly recommend it. Being a questioner and a searcher, and all too often feeling like I had been in the wilderness, I finally feel like I have arrived at a destination that feels like home. And this home centers on my belief that the real question is not whether or not God exists, but rather what is going on in the name of God. Specifically, what is this name calling you or me or anyone to do and to be? I have arrived at a place that isn't concerned about the objective reality, because frankly, it's above, way above my pay grade or anyone else's for that matter. But I love the poetry of the spiritual journey. And when I encounter the words of Ecclesiastes or Job or Mary Oliver or Cole Arthur Riley, my soul stirs in ways that are difficult to put into words. I find myself beyond this binary of labels, theist or atheist, in a space of peace and grace and wonder. It's a place of pure awe, where theology is mere straw, but theopoetry is pure gold. As someone who is now deeply middle-aged, I am coming to understand that my spirituality is ultimately one of homecoming, coming home to myself and healing, coming to listen to my life speak its unique truths, as Parker Palmer beautifully describes. And that means coming to celebrate my life as art and myself as an artist in the broadest sense of those words. I now say that my life's mission is to do justice and to love people. But I now know that Cody has helped me to see that that love should extend to all creation. And lastly, to savor beauty in the world. Now I see each of those elements as art, and like art, the possibilities are boundless as long as I'm willing and open to new horizons that are always beckoning me to broaden my care and concern for all of God's creation. In all of this, what sustains me is my meditation practice, informed by Buddhism and Judaism and Christianity, where all I do is sit in stillness and breathe. It's radically countercultural just to be. I can't say I'm good at it because of my monkey mind, but that's not the point. I do it anyway because it points to the unconditional. And lastly, beloved, I church. This place has helped me to understand that church is a verb, and its creed is none other than love. I am here not because of theology. I am here because of love, whether you believe in God or not. For in the final analysis, it's not our beliefs that matter. It's our actions that speak to whether or not we incarnate the very best of what the divine represents. And beloved, my deepest desire is that we will all be able to say, first in Latin, amamos ergo sumus. We love, therefore we are. Amen.